Are you a hustler who's been looking for a podcast that dives into the minds of the relentless hustlers, the game changers, and the unapologetic leaders who've conquered the business world? This is Pushing the Bar, where success isn't just a destination, it's a journey. We'll get into the minds of the relentless hustlers. You're about to get the real and raw truth about the highs, lows, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the entrepreneurial battlefield. You know, the place where dreams clash with reality and success is earned, not given. Shawn has been in the trenches, from a Verizon wireless salesman to building a damn tech empire worth millions.
Damn!
He's seen it all and lived to tell the tale. No sugar-coated fluffy crap here. Just raw, real-world advice served straight up. We're pushing the bar because success, it ain't gonna push itself. Now, here's Shawn Torres.
What's up, everybody? Shawn Torres, pushing the bar. Got somebody pretty awesome here today that I'm excited to talk to some things with. We met 2 years ago, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago at a user conference. This is Mr. Will Slappey, the infamous CEO of IT Voice. Has a pretty incredible company, incredible story, and I'm just excited to have you here, man.
Great. Thanks, Shawn. And always good to hang out with you. So thanks for inviting me on.
I appreciate that, man. I appreciate you making some time on this Friday before the new year. You know, we got 2024 coming up. I know how it is being a CEO of an organization, especially a large organization where we're going into the new year and it's like we're finishing everything for 23 and focusing on everything, pushing forward to 24. It's kind of like you get in that weird purgatory stage. You know, I don't know if you've been that way. I know for me, man, it's been a very odd week. You know, like I was just telling you, I was just at my house and I had to get out because I needed to go back to work for a little bit. So it's kind of nice to get in the office.
Yeah. I love strategy. So it's one of my favorite weeks of the year because you're, getting to finish executing your strategy from last year. And a lot of people are off. Customers are off. Employees are off. So it's usually a pretty quiet week. So it's been great to have a lot of hours, just me and the paper, working on what, our plans for next year are going to be. Yes.
It's funny you say that. I walked in the office a little while ago and I was talking with Frank, and Frank's my CFO, and Frank said, man, I'm actually doing real CFO work this whole week. And I laughed, so I love that, and he's kick ass. So we're super pumped about going into 24. We hit our goals that we set forth a year ago. So it always feels good to set that bar, in the beginning of the year in 20 or the end of the year in 22. And then obviously the triumphs and struggles you go throughout the year. So I don't know, but I'm assuming y'all hit y'all's metrics and the numbers y'all wanted to hit. So
we're on target. I haven't seen the final numbers yet, but the stuff I saw earlier today was looking like that we were going to be able to be there. So
nice. We went a little over, which is exciting. So not by a ton, but we definitely beat it. So that always felt really good. December was kick ass for us, which usually is not, right? In our space.
Yeah.
So but look, man, I'm sure we got some people that want to hear a lot about you and the business and how you got it here. 200 employees, 9 acquisitions last year, and then trying to merge it all together this year. Those of you don't know that Will, this was a family business that Will took over and has made it much bigger than when he took it over. So he probably could have just rode in the sun and just let it rip. But I love the story. You've always been a joy to talk to and a good partner for me to lean on just running a company. You obviously can do it well. So why don't you talk to us about where it started and kind of what's going on?
Yeah, happy to. Like you mentioned, my father founded the company actually 40 years ago, back in '83. And so, I had the privilege of growing up, in the company. And as early as the age of 5 was, sweeping the warehouse floor. I remember the old style Coke machine that you had to like open the little glass door and then pull the little lever down, whatever, refilling that thing. Later was, everything from sorting paper to pulling cable, and pretty much every job in the company, from the accounting, the sales, the operations, the technical, doing all of the various different things. Came on board with the company full time in 2009. I got my degree in behavioral economics from UAB, and so came on after I finished up my degree in 2009 full time. So I kind of divide, since then my career in like 5-year segments. So the first 5 years was really earning the privilege to lead the company. So just getting up to speed on all that it was. I'd learned my whole life, but there was still a lot to do, and especially learning on the management side of things. So did that from about 2009 to 2014. 2014 is when I took over running the day-to-day operations of the company. And then the next 5 years was, I didn't really even completely know at the time what I was doing. And looking back, it became a lot more clear. But really my main task at that time was transitioning the company away from founder-led sales to sales team-led sales. And ultimately, my father exited the company in 2019. And so it was really that 5-year span. He had built an amazing company, was one of the best salespeople. I mean, we could have a whole podcast just talking about some of the things that he did in sales. He's far better at sales than I am. But a part of that was very founder focused in terms of, he closed 90% of the deals, which was great. And he was awesome at it. And you could put him in, I had those one salesperson back then was like, all I have to do is get Bill in the room with the customer, and I know the deal will get closed, which was great, and built a fabulous, business of recurring revenue, with that strategy, and got us, where we are. Really, my dad, I think, did the harder part of going from, zero to, he had built the business to about 6 million. That was really the harder part of it. And so, but we had to grow. You're capped out.
Right? And that's about the cap, man. I'll tell you, speaking on that, I sit here and think about the early days. That's kind of when I started to lean into hiring sales professionals. I got the company from 0 to 6 million in revenue by myself, and I did it in a pretty short time frame. But you're right; it's kind of like the cap.
Yep.
It's like you're not going to get. That's what people always ask me, like, what will a high level salesperson sell? I'm like, if you can gain 6 million. Like they're humping and pumping. They're working their behinds off,
Yeah, for sure. So we, over that 5-year period, transition out of that, I brought in a sales director to lead the sales team, and being able to start growing. We were already growing organically, but growing outside of just founder-led sales. So then the next 5 years was when, as my father was exiting, was an opportunity to really grow the company in a whole new way, which was mergers and acquisitions. So I brought in some outside capital investment to be able to help us do that. And then in the last, basically it's about 4 years right now that we're on that journey. We've done 18 acquisitions in that span. So we went from around 6 million to 50 million in revenue, and about 35 employees to 200 employees. So, a lot of growth through, obviously we still got the organic engine that's churning, underneath, which is one of the things, because I know there was some questions from users about, doing mergers and acquisitions. The first piece of advice that I always give to anybody interested in doing that is you have to have a well-built sales engine before you consider doing any kind of mergers or acquisitions. And the reason is that when you do an acquisition, you have to resell the customers on who you are. And if you can't clearly articulate your value proposition, and if your customers have just come, to you because they've been doing business for a long time, word of mouth, referral, and those kinds of things, which is great. I mean, that's a great way to grow a business and have a good business. But that doesn't, when you go acquire a company and now you've got all these new customers, they don't know who you are. They don't have trust. They probably never heard of your brand, unless it's just right inside of the same city. They probably don't even know who you are. And so you've got to be able to clearly articulate the value that you're going to bring to them.
But a lot of your acquisitions aren't in your area.
All of the acquisitions have been out of we were originally in Birmingham, Alabama. We haven't done a single acquisition inside of Birmingham, Alabama. The closest was Tuscaloosa, which is about an hour away. And we had some customers there, but a lot of those customers didn't necessarily know who we were either. So, right. And the farthest one was in California, which they had no earthly idea who we are, out there. And so it was important to be able to resell those customers. So that's one of the first things, that I tell people is you got to have that good organic engine to be able to do that. And then a part of our strategy is a lot of cross-selling because we've got multiple different lines of business and we acquire companies that usually only do one or two. And so, there's a big opportunity to get that, as they say in the industry, a larger, chunk of that wallet share is a big, part of focus. And it's mutually beneficial because most customers don't want, as Fred Vicola, CEO of Kaseya calls it, they don't want vendor fatigue, right? If you got 6 different vendors that you're having to deal with, that's a pain in the butt. That's exactly right. It's a pain in the butt for the customer, to have to deal with all that. And so, it's a plus for them, when we come into play. And that's part of our message when we come in is like, hey, now we can do even more for you and take the great customer service that you've had from this team. And, we can wrap our arms a little bit farther around you and make it easier for you.
Well, I think that's the key, man. I think when you look at, when I look at your business model and I look at ours, as far as the product lines, I mean, we're identical, right? We have a voice product, we have a managed service division, and we have a physical security division. So when you,
we also have cybersecurity and we have a private cloud.
But think about that though, man. All of that stuff like revolves around the tech. And that's really what built us into having that is that we would go do someone's network and then they say, can you do our cameras? Because the cameras plug into the network. So then we started getting into that. And then, there's been countless projects that we've done where we've had to work with other vendors and especially and I'm sure you've dealt with this in the physical security market, like they have no clue about anything with a network. And Correct. When you start plugging high res video in across a network and you don't understand it, you could screw a lot of shit up. And yeah. I've watched it countless times. I mean, I never forget sitting in a meeting and I was on the network side, the CIO was there for a large bank. And then their large security vendor was there. And they asked in the meeting, we want to integrate with Active Directory so we can just hire employees and give them access based on their access levels. And I never forget their sales engineer and their sales rep were sitting in the room and they had looked around the room and they said, well, what's Active Directory? I was like, I remember sitting there like, oh shit. Like we're in trouble, So, but again, you're right. Being able to use that one vendor is so critical. So that's awesome that you can do that with your clients. So yeah. I think that's super important. So what's been, you get out there and you start targeting, Will, how do you know a good target? What is some of the early procedures that you're doing to make sure that it's going to be the right fit? And be able to inject it into your business. I'm sure you have some, and I know you and I have talked about this, but I think the viewers would love to hear some of that. Is what are some things that you're looking for when you're looking, I guess, searching in the market?
Yeah. So I would say a couple of things on that. So in a lot of ways, doing acquisitions is not too different from sales. So you need a big funnel at the top end. And so we rely on a lot of seller brokers. We've done some buyer brokers as well. The difference between the seller broker has a business and, somebody comes to them and says, hey, let's just call the guy Bob. Hey, Bob, I want to sell my business. Bob says, great. He helps them put together a package to, demonstrate the value that their business has. And then Bob goes out there and, sends the details. It's like a real estate agent, right? You'll hire a real estate agent to sell your house. You'll hire a business broker, to sell your business. And so those sell side brokers, is where we get a lot of those from. The buy side is one where you've probably all gotten a letter before, like, hey, do you want to sell your home or whatnot? Or you've got an email that says, hey, you want to sell your business? Those are the buy side brokers that are trying to find somebody that maybe isn't on the market yet, but they thought about it. And all of a sudden you hit them at the right time and you get them.
35 emails that I get a week asking me if I want to sell my business.
That's right. Those are all those buy-side brokers that are coming in. So I would start off with the important point of having a good funnel, because where I've seen some people make some mistakes is they get that one opportunity and they get tunnel visioned in on that one opportunity, and they don't realize there's a lot of other opportunities out there that may be a lot better fit for them, but they're just not exposed to enough. And then you can kind of get sucked into that. I mean, the same thing as when growing a business, right? Early on, you say yes to some customers that you shouldn't say yes to and who really don't fit your model, but you're like, hey, it's a sale, so I'm going to do anything to get any sale. And the same thing can happen on the acquisition side. You know, if you say yes to something that really is not the right fit because you feel like it's the one opportunity that you've got, you can make some bad decisions. So that's usually where I start, is make sure you got a broad enough funnel so that you can actually find those companies that are the right fit for you. Once you kind of get that good group, then I've got, about 8 categories or criteria that we look at. And there's a lot of subcategories and things that you can look at as well. The first one is always culture fit, and making sure that, the company from a culture perspective, and for us, it's things like, customer first is a big, do they prioritize, the customer in terms of, where they are, classic things like integrity or do the right thing, is a big, part of us. Another thing is like just common sense. Are they sticking to the rules? And maybe you got a culture that's a rule stickler type of culture, or maybe a culture like ours that's a little bit more like, hey, let's do what makes sense here, and let's use common sense in terms of, how that we're doing things. And making sure that they're reasonable, to deal with. Can they be flexible and make changes? Do they have that agile approach? So whatever the values are, whatever the culture is within, your company, you need to look at that. I'm also, the further out we get from our home office, I also have a little bit of a sensitivity from just differences in terms of the different parts of the country. And we've got everywhere from, Wisconsin out to California to Florida, and then everywhere in between. So we've got all over the country. But I do find that the farther away you get from wherever you are geographically, there's just some differences in terms of how people talk and how people act and how they
are different, right?
Yeah, it's all different. I mean, this is a huge country, and especially if you get outside of the country, and we've not done that, but I've got some friends who've done that, then that even produces more challenges that come into play. It doesn't mean you can't do a deal. It just means just be a little bit more cognizant of maybe some of those differences that may not be as obvious on its face value. So those are all kind of the cultural aspects, that we look at. We could probably spend a whole podcast just talking about culture. The next, we're going to look for percent of revenue, which is recurring. And then the next one after that, which is very similar related, which is percent of revenue that's recurring that's under contract. And so that becomes a big factor for us. How much of your revenue is recurring, and then how much of that recurring revenue is under contract, what type of contract is it? And one of the number one advices that I always give to any company who might look to sell down the road, because this one becomes a major pain in the butt down the road, is a very simple clause you can add to your contract that says a contract can be assigned without the customer's consent. We've had some acquisitions that almost did not go because all of a sudden, it was a big customer. It required the customer's consent. And then the seller didn't want to go tell the customer, hey, Mr. Customer, I need you to consent to this contract being assigned for me to sell my business. And then, that opens up this giant can of worms. Also, you don't want to buy a company that all of a sudden their major customers, have to consent, and that they could just be like, hey, it's great that you're under a 5-year contract, but the customer has to consent to the assignment. The customer could say, hey, I don't consent, and potentially break that contract. Now there's some other things around that, and usually they say requires reasonable consent, but you'd never want to end up in an argument about what is or is not.
Not with your client. No,
right. You just
with your client, you just spend a lot of money to acquire. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. And so that's an important point, that's a part of that. So I've seen some people overlook that of like, oh yeah, I've got good contracts, and then they don't have the consent part, and that can be kind of a little bit of a stick in the mud. Then we look at a churn rate, so obviously the lower the churn rate, the better. So that's an important factor for us. We're going to look at the growth rate, both on the bottom line as well as on the top line. Pay a little more attention to the growth rate on the top line and the bottom line, because a lot of times when businesses go to sell, we call it putting lipstick on the pig. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, their bottom line's doing this. And then 1 year where they sell, their bottom line does this, right? And you're like, what happened? And they start kind of cleaning things up and, reducing some expenses. Sometimes they stop investing in the future and those kinds of things, to push that bottom line up. So we kind of look at that, with a little bit of a grain of salt. But overall, we're looking at, what is the growth rate, both on the top and the bottom. And I will say specifically under that the recurring revenue growth rate is far more important in our businesses and in our industries than the project revenue. We know project revenue is going to do this. And a lot of our strategy, actually, when we acquire a company, is to convert as much of the project revenue as we can to recurring revenue.
Yes.
And so sometimes there's a short-term, loss by doing that. So we really focus in on the recurring revenue growth more so than like the total revenue growth. That sometimes, hey, you had one, we had some companies we bought in 2020, COVID money that was out there. They got some really big projects. They spiked up, and then the next year they came back down, right? And it was just an anomaly. And so, project revenue is great. It's good to have it, but it's not nearly as valuable as the recurring revenue. So we really zone in on the growth rate of the recurring. The EBITDA and EBITDA margin is an important note. In our industry, almost all the companies are acquired as a multiple of EBITDA. So what the EBITDA is important. And then, looking at what that EBITDA margin is and how close or far off they are from the standards. I highly recommend service leadership as a source that gives a lot of good benchmarks. So a company can actually use service leadership, and they can put all of their financial data in there and map it in there. And then they can actually get reports that show how they compare to the industry. They have an annual report. It's pretty expensive. It's like $1,500, but it's like a 200-page report.
Yeah, but it's interesting though. It's interesting. It's very interesting to read those reports.
It is very interesting. It's great because you can see okay, how does my company stack up to other companies? What do best-in-class companies look like from a gross margin, from a W-2 multiple, whatever the stat you want to look at? It's got some really good information, to see.
But I'll tell you, Will, one thing I'll say about that, man, and I'm glad you brought this up. So many. I go to these. We're a big ConnectWise company. And you go to these conferences and you talk to all these other IT companies, and there are a ton of $2 to $5 million companies. And look, man, there is nothing wrong with $2 to $5 million in business, right? I'm not
actually, it's like 65% of the MSPs are the 2 to 5 million range.
So, and I sit in these rooms, and a lot of these owners will ask me, how we do what we do. Like, how do we get to the point where we have grown this business, incredibly over the past, 14 years. We've never not had a year where we didn't do more revenue than the year before, even in big numbers, right? Like even going from 10 million to, 17 million to, 21 million. So when you start looking at that from that perspective, the biggest gap that I've noticed, man, is they weigh heavily on what should your profit be. Like, it's all you hear this term, and I agree that there's a book out there called Profit First. Look, man, I agree. I think profit is important. It's not about what you take in, it's about what you keep. But I also look at in business, if you're not making strategic investments to grow, like it's not going to just happen and say poof, right? Whether you're spending money on marketing, building an outside sales team that can go out there and get after it, inside teams, all these things, right? So what's your thoughts on that, man? I mean, I think, I've sat in those meetings, I'm like, oh man, if you're not at 20% EBITDA, you're not healthy. And I'm like, yeah, but all these people that are at 20% EBITDA, you're telling them to go fire their bad clients, keep the good clients, raise gross margin, and not invest. And I've yet to find a team out there. I found, a few that I've met. A guy I met, Brent, with Success down in Florida. They are absolutely killing it, and that's how they've killed it. They've killed it with just pure grinding in sales. So, they're having an incredible success. So what's your thoughts on that, man? Like, I look at them saying that, and I'm like, well, how am I going to get my EBITDA to 20% and also have a growth rate of 66% year over year?
Right.
How?
So one of the things that, and this is actually a huge challenge for us. So I'll answer your question in two parts. So one is most people don't do accounting right. So we'll talk about that in a second.
Yes.
The second piece is that, I agree with you. And actually Rob Stevenson, he's the CEO of Thrive, one of the biggest MSPs in our space. And when he does acquisitions, he actually told me, he said, Will, if their EBITDA is too high, it makes me concerned because they're probably not investing in their growth enough. And so there is a certain point, and it depends on the size business and and how you're positioned, everything. So there's not like I'm not going to give you a number and say, hey, if you're over, X%, then you're too high.
If you're $1 million company and you got a 25% EBITDA, look, there's nothing wrong. That's really not that hard.
Right. Yeah.
That's very controllable.
Correct.
Now,
correct.
Now, if you're a $20 million company with a 25% EBITDA in our space, that's, and you're showing growth, that's incredible. How?
Yeah. Well, we do that, but part of that is also we're to the size where my leverage on my vendors is significantly higher than the 3 million, revenue company. And so you also begin to get some of that. And also even from a labor perspective, we have some leverage because we can take the same experts and be able to leverage them across the entire company. And so, we've got a lot, like a classic, for example, a classic small company can't have really any tier ones because they don't really have enough tier one work to be done. As you get larger, there's enough tier one work that you can have more tier ones, which are obviously a lower cost resource. And then you escalate to tier twos and tier threes and tier fours. And so there is an advantage from a vendor perspective. There is an advantage from a labor perspective as you get larger that you can start to become more efficient in both of those categories, which has a significant help, in terms of the bottom line. You compound that with the wallet share portion. And so then the cost of sales to actually get into a customer really becomes less per customer or per dollar of revenue. And that also helps in terms of that EBITDA margin. One, absolutely to your point. And that's a trade-off decision, right? Everything in life is a trade-off decision. So as an entrepreneur, you might say, you know what? I've got a business and I am going to focus on profit. And maybe I've hit my lid from a growth perspective. And I really, I love what I do and I'm good at it. And I don't want to necessarily grow any farther. And if you're in that mode, maximize the profit and, put as much in the bank as you possibly can. That makes the most sense. But if you are going to grow, then, and here's actually a really great rule. It's called the rule of 40. And this is what a lot of private equity people use. I learned this from Fed Picola as well, the rule of 40. So what the rule of 40 says is that your growth rate on your company plus your EBITDA margin should equal 40. So as an example, if you're growing 20% and your EBITDA is 20%, then you've met the rule of 40 and that makes sense. If you are growing at 50% and your EBITDA is negative 10%, then you're at the rule of 40. If you're growing at 0% and your EBITDA is at 40%, then you're at the rule of 40. So it's a really easy sort of rule, if you will, to be able to say, all right, here's what my EBITDA is, and then here's what my growth rate is, and those added together, because depending on where you are in the maturity life cycle of the business, determines in terms of what you're doing. So that's kind of that a place to aspire to be. Now, I think realistically, if you can get over like 30 to 35, you're doing, you're in that top echelon.
You had me doing math in my head real quick to make sure I was right.
Yeah, it's hard to get to that 40 number. That is a stretch.
That's what we did. We grew year over year in 23. We grew 25%, and our EBITDA number probably sits somewhere around the 16, 17%. So yeah, that's about spot on. Now look,
if you were to stop growing and turn your growth down to 10%,
my EBITDA I could skyrocket it. And I know what I'm investing in just sales alone. To do it again in 24.
Exactly. And in our business, it's really difficult too, because we're going after recurring revenue. And this is where we get into the accounting pieces in a second. When you're going after the recurring revenue, you have all of your upfront sales cost that you're putting out there, but you're not getting that revenue for, depending on how long the contract is, for 3 to 5 years in terms of when you're actually recognizing that. So it's heavy laden on the cost side on the front end, but you've got, the revenue that's coming over a period of time. So a couple of things in the accounting world. So if you follow GAAP accounting, you're actually supposed to take any of the commissions associated with recurring revenue, and those should be distributed over the term of the contract, which most companies don't do. So that
do that.
help.
Yeah,
You know,
we absorb it.
Right. Yeah. So the accounting principles say, hey, anything that's a fixed cost like salary or, expenses, whatever that just happens, those have to be taken in the period, that they occur. But if you have a commission that's directly, the only reason you paid the commission was because you got the contract, then that commission should be spread over the life of that contract. Another piece is, if you have any sort of built-in labor cost or equipment cost or other things that are associated with putting that contract into place, those things should also be capitalized and then amortized over the life of that contracted revenue as well. So those are some costs that
too, Will. I don't know if you see that. Did you have to rework any deals to make an acquisition work?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
We did. I'm trying to think if we had to rework every single one. Probably not, but yes, there's always rework to be done on deals. You want to dive in, I guess, maybe some examples of how deals are structured, or
I'm sure with that, viewers trying to understand is, you put a LOI in with a client, you're looking under the hood, but not looking super deep. And then you start getting deep and you start to learn deeper about the business. And what I've learned, man, and I've done so much study on this, and we're looking at some acquisitions right now to scale. I know you and I have been talking about this, and scale faster and to get some other market share in other markets, is that if you can take your P&L and the way you operate and then overlay it, their workload and your same model, that's where you can kind of really see some differences. Because one thing that I've noticed, man, and look, we were making this mistake too early in, Will, is I kept saying, oh man, our gross margin is 70%, 68%, right? Well, then when I really made an investment and hired a real CFO and brought Frank here, Frank looked at my P&L and he says, hey man, I got to change all this. And I'm like, cool, dude, man, you know this way better than I do. I mean, Frank was working for $1 billion organization, right? And when he flipped everything up where it needed to go and put the right cost and expenses in the right place, my gross margin was actually around 47%.
Yeah, I bet you didn't have any of your labor and cost of goods.
I didn't, and that's really what we're selling,
right?
Every
company we've acquired has not had their labor in cost of goods. This is actually
if you're an MSP owner and you're watching, quit running around thinking you have a 70% gross margin, because you don't. And take your cost of your techs and your help desk and your field people and put them above the line, because they are an expense that you have to have in order to get to gross margin. And you will be surprised on how fast your revenue changes. So,
yeah. And most MSPs are selling labor, right? I mean, it's a fixed price contract, right? But you're selling service. So, yeah, it's not SG&A. This is actually one of the other reasons I love to recommend service leadership, because they walk through here is where all of the labor should go, on the P&L, and you can start to actually look at your P&L more correctly, with that. But yeah, there's been all sorts of things where I've had conversations through the 18 acquisitions where somebody's telling me, the gross margin, whatever sort of number, and I'm like, no, that's not. You're not counting something right if you're doing it that way.
No. Well, I think you got to watch the add backs, it gets super interesting when you start getting into the details. And look, I get it, man. If you're a business owner and you're selling your business, of course your baby is more valuable than what others would probably value it at. Right. But I think at the end of the day, Frank always tells me, Shawn, math is math. And I learned a lot. So I started that fiber business. And my partner was getting out of the business, and we were bringing on a new strategic partner who's been incredible for us. And I was so hung up on they were going to pay off some debt that we're going to get the company cash flowing, and I was going to lose equity from dilution. And I kept going back and forth with Frank, and Frank kept saying, Shawn, math is math. And I learned a lot about selling a business, right? Which I'm still a partner today. Jimmy and I maintain 20% ownership in that business, and it's been incredible. They're making big investments. I mean, that company's going to skyrocket. I'm super excited to see it flourish. And, I think that what you have to remember is that, like, again, math is math, finance is finance. And when you start breaking down the valuations of a business, and they're only worth so much, right? So if you start looking at, I've had people try to tell me in this game that their company's worth, 40 million. And I'm like, well, okay, well, cool. How much revenue are you doing? And they're like, 6 million. I'm like 6 million net. And they're like, no, top line. I'm like, buddy, you're not a SaaS company. And like the days of that SaaS sale of 15 times top line, like, good luck. Like
Well, if you have those numbers still exist if you actually have a SaaS company.
Yeah, if you own the platform, if you built the platform and like you created it, and of course. And look, and as well as I do, when you peek behind the curtains and look at those acquisitions, there is a lot of stock that goes into that. So like, that's another thing that I think people need to recognize too, is that if you're looking to sell your business and you're looking to stay in, just remember that sometimes they're going to offer you stock that can you control that? Like, it's not tangible cash, right? And I think that's where so many people get, hung up. And I've heard some great deals. A buddy of mine just sold his company up in St. Louis, and he got an incredible deal for his business. He's been a great mentor for me throughout. I still talk to Steve. I love Steve. He built an incredible business, and now he's just hanging out in Key West and driving race cars and enjoying life. He's 67 years old and getting out. So, but yeah, I think you're right. You gotta value reasonably. And I think from the buyer side, from your perspective, so when you're buying, and you're facilitating those conversations, say you're looking at a business, they have longevity. So they've proven that they can operate, but yet you've seen some plateau of the business, maybe even a decline in revenue, because obviously the longevity, sometimes the owner does not have the same energy as that they had before to drive it, right? And you step more away and you don't see as much growth. So what's your thoughts on that? When for the viewers that are looking at purchasing a business, there is no growth.
Yeah, so and let me hit the last two criteria I got on my list, and so I don't forget, and then jump in your question. So largest customer percent is a big factor. So if you got one customer or two customers that make up 50%, then that can become a red flag. And then the last one is the integration level or operational maturity. And so a lot of what we're talking about here, in operational maturity, there's actually you can actually get a score on that with service leadership. I don't work for service leadership at all. I just love their stuff. But you can actually, it's called OML, an operational maturity level. And so you can actually score yourself to see how you are, and you can get tidbits on how to get better with that.
God, that's so true though, Will. Operational maturity, like it's interesting, man. I've become friends with some very large business owners in our industry, and like, they've leaned against us on operational workflow and how we operate. And like, Jimmy, of course, is a fucking genius when it comes to that, and has built an incredible operation over here. So it's very surprising to see some of the revenue size on some of these companies, but then look at how immature of an operation that they are. Like, it's by the sheer grace of God that they're even making any money.
Right. So, and the reason why I bring that up is because it ties in very strongly to your question. So one of the big factors that we look at, and this is part of operational maturity, is can the business survive well without the founder? And a company that has a strong operational maturity, and like I'm thinking of one that we had where the owner left in less than 30 days of us acquiring the company. And it was highly successful. We didn't lose any customers. We've grown it since then. That location has hit all of their, and we talk about the numbers, that location has hit all of their numbers and done extremely well because that company was at a very high level of operational maturity that was not solely dependent upon that founder to be there. Other companies that we've acquired have had very strong dependencies on the founder. And so in that case, one, the founder can't just leave day one. And two, there's a lot more risk associated for us when we go and acquire them, because even though you can do employment contracts or consulting contracts or whatever for them to stay around, you can't really force somebody to stay if ultimately they don't want to. And so there's risk that's inherent there. So getting back to your question of how do we look at, if they're a business that's plateaued, or any scenario that you could throw at me, Shawn. And the answer would always be, it's always about how the whole thing fits together. So if you have one where maybe the business has been flat, but the operational maturity is extremely high and it's a very stable customer base, there's zero churn, with that business, and they've got other people in place that are running the day to day, and all they've done is just lost their spark, and there's not a whole lot of new sales that are happening. I'm going to value that company at still a decent rate because I know I can acquire it. I can come and put the sales on top of it and turn the spigot on and be able to take that customer base, and I can grow it well beyond. Now, it won't be as highly valued as if you check all the boxes, of course, right? But it's going to be at a strong value versus if you had a company that they're plateaued and I look at it and the owner's still doing 100% of the sales and they've got no contracts in place and they've got one customer that makes up 50% of their revenue, down the list of things, and they've got, churn that's coming in there, and they got customers that they're losing, and that's the reason why they're plateaued. That's a completely different story and a completely different, evaluation as a company that, hey, we've had the same 50 clients, and our youngest client is 5 years old. And our business has just been plateauing. We've never lost a customer. That's a completely different sort of scenario. So I always dig into why is it plateaued? And a lot of MSPs that are out there that have really grown from word of mouth and just doing a great job with their customer, and then they just slowly sort of grown. I don't necessarily hold a lack of a strong growth rate against them. And what I'm really going to key in on is how well does the business operate? What's the story with the founder? Do they want to leave? Do they want to stay? And what does all that look like? And then how can we make a successful transition? And we've had, founders that have stayed on board with us. And we've had founders that, have left. And then in a lot of cases, we have more than one founder that's involved, as many as 4. And now you got some who stay and some who go. And so we're going to look through all of that. Ultimately, for us, the real question that we always ask is, how much can I make it worth, right? Because ultimately that's the value to me, right? So whenever I'm buying a business, I'm not buying it for what it is, right? I'm buying it for what I can turn it into. And so that's where some of those other factors kind of come into play. And so I'm like with any business decision, what's that high end potential that I can get? And then what's that low end risk that I have associated with it? And that question is really the biggest factor that's coming into play. So if I have a high upside and minimal risk downside, obviously you're willing to pay more for that than something that has minimum upside and a high risk. And then something, you got those weird scenarios where it's, high upside and high risk, and so those are probably the most tricky to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that puts a lot of pressure with trying to integrate, and get things moving when that risk is associated. It's funny you say that because it's so interesting that the things that I've learned over the years and just in creating friends in the industry is you look at that percentage of revenue coming from one client. We at one time had a client that made up about 14% of our revenue, and that was too high to me. My rule of thumb is 10%, and nobody makes up more than 10% of our revenue. Not one client. So, and we try to keep it that way.
Yeah. Our rule is 3%, but we have a little bit of an edge there because of our size.
Right. Yeah. You can flex that. You can flex that number. I mean, it's the same with us, man. I mean, if at the size we are today, if I was to lose a large client, it would hurt for sure. But it's not a detriment. And I also think that. And
Shawn, I think that that's a really important point, because maybe somebody's listening out there that they're like, I'm not necessarily thinking of doing M&A anytime soon. Even if you're not thinking about doing M&A, having a large client, the number one detriment to it is that it can make you make really bad business decisions. Because when you start making your business decisions, thinking about how I'm going to serve that one or two clients and make them happy, then all you really have is just a job working for that one client.
And now you're working for that client, right? I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think that one thing that I've learned over the years, and I think that what people get nervous about And I think the problem with the MSP market is they haven't built that sales model, right? That they can consistently add net new MRR. And we live in a world coming from the telecom space that is a very normal thing to be selling every single month. Like I'll meet MSPs and they're like, "Oh, I brought on 2 new clients last year." I'm like, "Wow." Like that's scary, because we're bringing on probably
if they were 200,000 a piece and recurring revenue,
right.
that could be.
It'd be different, right? But they're not. And I look at how much net new revenue, we're pulling in each year. So I'm not afraid to I don't need to change the way that I operate to attain to that big revenue client. Because even though I know if I lost them, I also look at like I'll replace that revenue in 90 days. Like, because I know that I'm going to go sell. Like we
Right.
know.
And actually, this is a really, really great point, because one of the things that we do a lot with acquisitions is that a lot of these MSPs, and here's some other good tips for people operating. This is operational maturity. A lot of MSPs do not have annual rate increases built in their contract. But your labor cost, your vendor costs, like everything goes up. So from an operational maturity level, you should have that built in. But because of that, we acquire a lot of them that don't have that. And so they got a lot of underpriced customers. But what you're talking about here ties in directly, because when you have the sales engine and you know you can replace it, it gives you the confidence to be able to do the price increases that you need to do on your existing customer base to get them priced with where you are.
Well, you have to, man. And I think where people screw up is they're so afraid to lose a client. We lost one recently, and I never forget. Everybody was kind of freaking out. It was like 6,000 a month in revenue, and we're not used to losing that large of a client. I'm looking, and I'm like, oh well, we're bringing on $27,000 to $37,000 in net new MRR a month. So I'm like, it's not really that big of a deal. But then when I pulled up agreement profitability, and I'm like, holy shit, like we weren't making any money with it. So when I got on with the CTO, I even told him, I was like, look, buddy, I'm glad. Like, how fast can we transition out? I'm actually only making 10% on your account.
And the cost to the employees, because I don't know why it is, but so many of those unprofitable customers, a lot of times,
well, that's what it was.
Call a lot. They're not the nicest people to deal with.
When I saw the number of service tickets, well, it was that's what was driving agreement profitability down. So it was a good thing. And
they're not taking your recommendations. That's why they have as many service, issues as well.
They're not making investments in their business. And you, in my opinion, if you want to grow your MSP, you have got to be prepared to tell clients, we will not work with you anymore if you're not going to do it this way. And if you are not mature enough to do that because you're so afraid to let go of the revenue, like that was one of the pitfalls that I made as an owner. Like I didn't want to lose any revenue, no churn. I was so proud to say no churn. But then the reality was we had clients that, like, unfortunately, like it was time to churn them because they were so old in the way we sold these contracts, being so immature and not really understanding how this business model works. Like you have to go shift it. And it's in my opinion, it's a very easy conversation if you have operational maturity, because like I can literally bring you a financial document that will show you why you have to pay me more money or I have to let you go. Like I will. And if you don't want to pay me because I'm losing money, then like, I'm sorry. We will give you a 90-day notice and we will transition. And like, because again, that puts strain on other clients.
And Shawn, this is exactly how, like when I talked about before, the value we see, that's exactly what we do. We acquire a company. We systematically go through their customer base and right size it and have these hard conversations. And we churn out, some of those customers that don't make sense and are unprofitable, but it takes a lot of operational maturity. It takes those processes, knowing all those things. I'll give you a
great example, Will. This is pretty cool. And I never forget when I was doing this. This is a very small acquisition we were doing. A great friend of mine, Steve Bordelon, was looking to retire, had a great IT business for 30-something years, DeltaCon. They were doing about $770,000 in revenue, all T&M, no contracts. When I brought it to my attorney's like, Shawn, this is a terrible buy. They have no contracts, blah, blah, blah. And I said, Mike, I get what you're saying, but the risk and the valuation that Steve is putting on it is fair. So, and Steve believes that we can convert. And we had already had all these conversations, literally no LOI, no nothing. Like Steve and I sat down, we went through the client base and said, who do you think would sign contracts? and like, cause we don't do T&M. We do zero T&M. It's all contract based. Well, I took that business of doing 770,000. They had about 75 clients. I brought it down to 9 clients, and in 2 years did 1.9 million in revenue. So it took me 2 years to get it all in alignment, right? And to get it flush. But if I look at what I paid for that business versus what I'm getting out of it today, if I looked at my return on investment, I wish I could go find 30 more like that, because we got all the noise out, all the, and look, there was very difficult conversations, and right. Steve dealt with like going through a phase of like, man, we're going to go fire these people. But like, he was doing one-off stuff at these attorneys' houses. And like, we don't do all that. Like, I'm not driving to your house and fixing your Windows Home computer. I'm sorry. I'm not fixing, we don't do all that. Like, that's not our model. So we went and had conversations. I went and found a good friend of mine who owns a very small IT firm. And I said, hey buddy, congratulations. I got a ton of customers for you. You're going to love me. I'm going to flood you with a ton of work. And I was able to give him about 30 of them that we transitioned together. So they were happy. Client was happy. He was happy. I'm happy. Like it all worked out. And I think you're right, man. I think you have to look at that client base and really understand what can you do with it, And
I would say a couple of things about this as we're talking, and listeners out there are listening to kind of what their options are. So, and I'm going to contradict myself here on purpose. So one option is, and a lot of this depends, I would say, on the energy that you have available to you. If you're 75 years old, it's different from if you're 45 years old, right? And so the options are like, okay, one, take some of the stuff that we're talking about here, and all of this is operational maturity, right? And it's like, if you want to get the best bang, and you're like, let's just use the example, you got all T&M clients and whatnot, go and convert all of those T&M clients to recurring revenue, weed through all the crap that's in there and get it to where it needs to be. And then that's where the business will be the worth the most, right? All right. So now I'm going to contradict myself. One of the things that happens though, is that one, you don't have the experience in doing that. You don't have the confidence to go do that. You've been doing it the same way for a long time. And so sometimes making that pivot can be difficult to do. So sometimes you can sell your business for less, and you sell it and position it with like the potential of what it is. But you have to understand that people in our shoes are never going to pay for as much for potential as they are for.
Yeah, we're not going to give you a 5X on a potential, right?
Right.
You can't.
Right. Exactly. But understanding where those are. But then here's why when we talk about like deal structures, and I know the question from the chat was, about like, hey, have you ever had to retrade a deal or different things like that? So one of the ways to be able to do that, is like earnouts, for instance, which we're not a big fan of earnouts because it's hard sometimes to create clear expectations on earnouts, but it's an option of a way to do it. Another way is a retained stake that you mentioned before, like with stock deals and stuff like that, where you get a retain, and then we've done a decent number of those where now we're buying a company, but then they get a small retained stake inside. So now they get the upside potential, down the road as the company grows.
Well, I think another way to do it too, that I've seen, is you structure the deal to where you say, hey, we'll make it easy, right? Say you're buying a company for $10 million. I'm going to give you $5 million cash today upon closing. You're going to finance to me on a note $5 million over 3 years, based on the performance of the business and how it sustains its revenue. If we maintain where we are today, I'm going to continue holding the debt of the 5 million. Year one, if we have more than an X amount dip, I'm going to take that EBITDA number. I'm going to pay you the multiple that I gave you in the beginning, and I'm going to deduct that off the debt service. Year two, I'm going to do the same thing. And typically most owners within 2 years, now obviously, if you're losing control of your business and I'm operating it wrong, I could screw that up. And I see there's risk associated there, right? For the
and usually like the better earnouts that I see are not based upon EBITDA, because usually the exiting owner doesn't have control. It's usually better to base the earnout off of revenue.
Top line. Yep.
Yeah, because then that's like revenue is what it is. It's technically you can monkey with it, but it's like you're kind of doing some shady crap if you're monkeying with it. So so that's a good way. The other option too that we've done in a couple of scenarios is actually just a sales commission plan for the owner. So there was one deal that we did that said, look, we're going to pay you X amount for the business. And then here's your sales commission plan. You go take all your T&M customers and you sell them our MRR plans, and we'll pay you commission.
That's exactly what I did with Steve. So Steve got to sell his business. He got to make commission on moving to our contracts. He got paid a very nice salary for he signed a 2-year employment contract with an opt-in at 1 year, and literally at 366 days walked in my office and said, I feel like I've done my job. I converted all the ones we wanted to convert. Are you good if I go ahead and retire? And I said, Steve, I'm going to throw you a badass retirement party. And I did. I threw him a big old party. He's an incredible guy.
Yeah. And going back to where we started with this, so the thing is important is that there's two kind of big fundamental options. Go grow your business to being operational mature. But like in the one guy that I'm thinking about, like even in our conversations before the sale, he basically said, Will, I don't want to go design all these products and go learn all that stuff and whatnot. I'm going to retire in 5 to 10 years from now anyway. And so, it really made sense for him to be like, look, come over to us, turnkey, and then now you can do what you really love and what you're really great at, which is working with the customers, and go convert all your customers that you've got over, go sell them, not only convert them from some of the T&M stuff that he had over to fixed price, but also sell all the lines of business because he was only doing the one MSP stuff and didn't have any of the others, and then make a bunch of money that way. And he's probably doing it that way. He's probably net out better financially, and is a lot less stressed because he didn't have to go convert his business from one model to another all by himself.
That's hard, Will. I mean, when you start thinking about building the product SKUs and the packaging and the structure, and you start looking behind the scenes of all the work that takes to put together, I mean, you're right, man. I've seen so many MSPs just do it wrong. They overthink it. They're doing it wrong.
Well, and it takes multiple personalities to be able to do it, right? I mean, I got a team of 200 people. I don't create product SKUs. I don't touch ConnectWise. I do, but I'm not doing it versus somebody that's got 5 or 10 employees that's literally doing all that themselves and trying to sell. It's just a lot to be done. So, there is that break point in that decision of saying, when have I really reached the point that's kind of at my capacity and it makes sense to join forces with somebody to leverage what they can bring to my customer base and me be a whatever mechanism in terms of whether it's a stock or an earnout or a sales commission plan. Those can all be great options to be able to say, hey, let me take what I've got, join it into a larger organization that now can gain more value from it, and I can gain a portion of that value, as well. So there's different strategies, and there's not one strategy that's better than the others. You just have to look at where you are in your journey and, pick the one that makes the most sense for what your appetite is.
But I love what you said about you got to have some, ability to organically sell and grow. Cause I think that some of the biggest things that I've seen going to these conferences and talking to these owners is like, they get hung up on like, I'm going to go do M&A and I'm going to grow that way. And that's my strategy. But then they can't sell. So like, is your plan to buy that business? You're getting the revenue, but then
if you can't sell, you can't extract the value from the acquisition. Right. That's the point.
Right. I agree. You're not going to be able to go in there and have those conversations with those clients and structure them. Like, I think it's just kind of like, any software system, bad data in, bad data out. And like, that's what's going to happen. And then you're just going to create this strain that you can't go grow. And that's where, look, man, I was hot and heavy talking with a private equity wanting to buy us, and we're having really good conversations. And I told him, I said, look, his idea was to get and go hammer acquisitions, like hammer them fast. And I was like, look, man, like I look at our growth rate over the past 3 years, and it has broken things a lot. Like when you grow like that, last year was 66%. Like it breaks things. Shit, 25% growth organically breaks things, right? And that's where trying to teach them, explaining to him, like, look, man, I'm gonna have to pass right now because I don't like your strategy. Like I think that's the wrong strategy for right now. I'm not saying that we don't want to do some, but not hammer them immediately. I really think that we can continue doing what we're doing. Cause it's not normal. I mean, how many MSPs out there at 10 million, let's just say, are growing 25% year over year? Like they're not. Like I've met literally one in the last 2 years, and I've been searching for them to figure out, like, a lot of them are happening through M&A, and their sales teams inject, and then they grow revenue that way, which, look, I mean, you've done it. You've proven that shit works, man. You've built an incredible business and gotten to 50 million, and that's our plans, is we want to get to where we want to go just a little faster. But I think I'll never forget, you and I were talking one night, and you said, Shawn, they both have their ups and downs. And, like, I don't think there's really one wrong way to do it. But don't go do an acquisition just because you hear all these people in the market doing an acquisition. Like, Shawn, like, you're growing your business and you're doing it in a way that works. And another friend of mine told me the same thing. He goes, man, what is it going to cost you to invest in that business? And I was like, I don't know, $2 million. And he's like, all right, take that same 2 million, invest in what you're already doing. And, like, what's your return look like? You're probably going to get a great return. So just, and I've kind of, it's funny because I've taken that advice, and we've kind of done a little bit of both right now. And it's been exciting to look at the investment that we're making on the sales side and really pushing. And look, man, it's crazy because it's working, and I look at, I'm seeing the pipeline grow, and I'm looking at what opportunity we have as an organization. I mean, today, Terry, one of our, lead sales guys, probably sold the most revenue this year on an MR basis. He rocked it today with a badass deal that like made his year, 25,000 in MR. So, Terry, I don't know if you're watching, but congratulations and thank you. You made my day when you sent me that text message this morning that you brought the deal in on the 29th. So that's no awesome. Sandbagging, baby. So,
well, and Shawn, I actually have a LinkedIn post. I already wrote it. It's coming out in the next couple of days. So I'll give a little preview here, but it basically kind of walks through like a couple of scenarios, and it says, what is 5 plus 5? 10. Well, what is 2 plus 8? It's 10. What is, the square root of 100? It's 10. What is 20 divided by 2? It's 10. What is 2 times 5? It's 10, right? And literally, you could go to an infinite amount of equations to get to 10. And we'll just say 10 represents success or a successful path, or, what you're doing. And just because somebody else did it one way doesn't mean that that's the way that you should do it. Now, learn from them, right? Take the principles of what they've done and say, okay, yeah, let me, but ultimately speaking, and actually a lot of what we've even done at IT Voice is, and I tell all the new acquisitions is, it's like cheating in poker. I'm taking the 18 acquisitions, and imagine they all have their 5 cards. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to take that ace there. I'm going to take that king there. I'm going to take that queen there. Oh, hang on, you got hearts. All right, great. Let's swap those around. And you can come up with a winning hand by taking the best of all of them and combining together. And so I think that's really, like, listen to people like you and I, and hopefully you take away one of the nuggets that we share that helps you. But don't try to do it the way I did it, because it's probably not going to work exactly for you.
And not everybody's personality. I had a young gentleman come up to me at a conference, and been in business for 10 years, was at about 900,000 in revenue, wants to grow his business. And I asked him, I said, look, man, can I ask you a question? How good are you at sales? And he said, I'm actually terrible. I was like, well, what's your superpower? Like, what are you really good at? He's like, I'm really good at, like, engineering and the technical side. I said, okay, I'm gonna give you the best advice, and you're gonna hate the advice that I'm about to give you, but I'm gonna give you the best advice you can do if you want to succeed. And he's just kind of looking at me, like, with a smile on his face, and he's getting excited. And I said, I would hire a recruiter. I would have them search for a CEO that is a sales-minded CEO. I would hire that person. I would put them in charge of leading the company from a sales perspective, and can they build a sales plan, and can they execute? And you be the COO, and you control the operational maturity of the business. And he just looked at me and was like, well, I'm the CEO. And I'm like, well, I get that, man. But if you work for a business today as a CEO, and you did not grow that business for 10 years like you've done, they would fire you. They'll fire you. They will let you go. Look at any publicly traded company. If their CEOs are not creating profit or growth, they get let go.
You're not reaching the rule of 40.
Yeah, right. You're going to get let go, right? So like fire yourself from the role, bring in the role that's going to do that, and just go grow and you're still the owner. That doesn't mean you can't be the owner. And I think what I learned when we implemented EOS was like, it's okay to be the CEO hat, COO hat, and then you have this owner's box over here that you get to be the owner of the business. Like, and that's okay, you know?
Yep.
And I think so many people,
and you're not even talking about the happiness factor.
right?
Because the reality is, if that guy were to go and learn sales and go to a conference and read the books, he would hate it, right?
They're not going to want to pick up they're not going to want to pick up the phone and dial. They're not going to want to do that shit. And like, if you don't enjoy that, like, and you don't enjoy that chase, I will tell you, I mean, I've told you this and I've told viewers here 1,000 times. I love that shit, man. Like that, you want to get me in the best mood ever.
I love
like,
your post. It was like, pick me up.
Pick me up, I'll make you money. It's so true, man. Like it's like, I never understood that. Like so many guys have reached out to me since I got heavy presence on social for advice, and 90% of the ones that I talk to, I've had people asking me to coach them recently, and I'm like, look, I don't know if I'd be a good coach because I don't know if you're going to enjoy. Taylor, I got stickers made for all the phones here in the sales office that say that. I'll send you some. I love it, you know. But it's like you have to like that. Just like me. Like if you put me in Jimmy's world and what Jimmy does, oh dude, everybody would quit. Like no, we'd have no employees here. Like I'm not as smart as Jimmy, and I know that. Like I'm not, and I knew that when we started the business 14 years ago, how smart Jimmy was. Because I remember when we started our Anytime Fitness, like how thorough Jimmy was. Like I just knew how to go get memberships, like, and I could get people to sign up. But like when it came to building the plan and the operational things and all that, like Jimmy was good at that. So like the yin and yang. And I think so many people get hung up on that yin and yang. And I said, man, he goes, man, I can't afford a really expensive CEO. And I was like, well, man, I get what you're saying, but give them an opportunity. Maybe you give them a piece of the business and they earn equity in the business based on the growth rates, like structure an employment contract where they're going to earn ownership in the business. You still get to maintain control, but they're going to earn ownership in that business. And if you have a good platform and a basis, and clearly you do, you've been doing it for 10 years and have maintained revenue, like start there. And I think that's where, you know,
or you could have sent him to me, Shawn, and said, here, look,
I got a guy that'll buy you. Yes. It's a good idea. I'll send him your way.
I mean, you know, that's the other option. And he could maintain some ownership by joining, you know, forces with us. And then we'll put the sales team on top to be able to grow it and take it. And he can still be, you know, that lead engineer. So there's a lot of different pathways to success. And you got to figure out, you know, who are you? What are you great at? And then how do you fit
and what's going to work? You're right. Well, look, man, I know we're a little over our time. We could probably sit here, me and you, and talk for like 4 hours on this topic. Look, Will, if viewers want to reach out to you, I know you've been a wealth of knowledge for me in my business. Good. All right, we got to go on the screen. Thank you, Taylor. So, look, if anybody needs to connect with Will, I highly suggest you at least go give him a follow. He is heavy on LinkedIn. His posts are hilarious. He inspired me to start posting more and get to do what I'm doing today. So I encourage you all to reach out to him. He's a wealth of knowledge and just an all around kick-ass CEO. So super smart, super cool, very willing to talk. So again, Will, I appreciate.
Are you going to get down on one knee in a second? I'm not sure what's about to happen.
I thought about it. You know, I thought about it a few times. No, you again, man, you've been, you know, I think I try to preach that a lot about too many people don't reach out to people and be vulnerable. I've been extremely vulnerable with you and had discussions with you. And I think that's where, if you want to grow and you want to be really good at being a business owner, an entrepreneur, whatever you call yourself or what you want to do, I think too many people hesitate to reach out to people that have success.
What's the worst that can happen? You know, I mean, reach out to 10 people. If only one person takes you up, like, in my experience in talking to people, and you can tell me if you agree, I would say I probably have about a 70% success rate. I mean, if I reach out to somebody, now it has to be reasonable. I have to, like, if I reach out to, I don't know, like somebody way outside of my, Jeff Bezos or something like that, be like, hey,
he's probably not going to respond.
Probably not going to respond. Right. But if usually I try to reach out to somebody that's twice to 10 times larger than where I am.
That's good advice. Don't go grab, like, if I had to think when I was running a $4 million business
Go grab somebody that's 10 million or 20 million, something like that.
That I have to today at 20 plus million, I will tell you, if I went from, if you put the Shawn Torres CEO of $4 million business in the seat today, I would fail miserably. So I think you're right. Make sure you're being reasonable with someone you're reaching out to, and like understand that, because it would be super difficult for me to network with a $600 million CEO. Like it's different levels, even though it's all the same. It's all relative, right? His expenses are higher. It's all the same business, but I think you're right. I think be relative and look, don't be afraid.
So somebody I usually tell people 2 to 10 times larger than you, or 2 to 10 times farther.
In terms of, and like in us MSPs, like the coolest thing, and I've learned so much from my customer base. Like my wife has told me, Shawn, you think it's okay that you're so vulnerable with your customers and have had these conversations about operational issues, financial issues, all these things? And I'm like, well, yeah, like at the end of the day, like they're having the same problems I'm having too. Just we all have it. Like that's just a reality. I learned that being a part of a CEO peer group and EO and Vistage.
Well, Shawn, over here at IT Voice, the sales team always sells it perfectly, and operations just praises them for how good of a job that they did. And accounting never complains about how it was set up. I mean, that never happens here.
So don't be afraid to like lean on your clients too. Like don't be afraid to talk to your clients and have conversations around what can be better and what can make you better as an owner. Again, I preach it nonstop. If you want to
join a peer group, if you struggle with asking, like there's a bunch of great peer groups, some specific for the MSP.
You got to be vulnerable. Like I've been in multiple peer groups where you have this CEO that is afraid to like lift the skirt up and say that they're not making money. Like, don't be afraid to say that you're not making money, and like find ways to get to where you are making money. And again, like I've watched it time and time again. If you're not selling, you're dying. I'm a big component of.
Are you going to get that as the other sticker?
Yes.
I will make you money if you're not selling, you're dying.
Yes. It's so true though, man. Like, and it's just the mentality that I've had. I work on a fear mentality, even though I don't have to. We're a very healthy and heavily based MRR company. But I just want to grow, and I like kicking ass, and I like setting goals, and I like crushing them. I like the challenge, and you got to be up for that, so also be wary of growth. So growth brings on other struggles too. So just know that, right? You make more money, you have more responsibility. That's just a reality. And no matter what you do,
you have to change how you operate. Fred Vicola, he's one of my mentors, and he told me about a year ago, it was really appropriate advice. He said, Will, it's easy to hold people accountable. It's much more difficult to hold people accountable for holding people accountable.
Way harder.
And the more you grow, I mean, you get to like where he is with Kaseya. He's holding people accountable for holding people accountable for holding people accountable for right.
Look, I see it in our business at 100 employees, and it's like, whoa, like trying to figure that out and work that down. If you're not working on those systems internally in your business, I highly encourage you to start doing that and build a culture of accountability and metrics with 10 employees and scale it. Because I will tell you, we went and scaled the business, and I just outkicked my coverage, and I got to about 50 employees, and I had no metrics, and I had no accountability, and it has taken years to fix that.
But there's always, to your point, there's always something that you've got to do. My other great piece of strategy or advice along those is the percent of this is one of those. I put this on LinkedIn from time to time. 2 to 4% of a business's time should spent being strategic. So if you have 10 employees, then that means 20 to 40% of the CEO's time should be strategic. If you have 100 employees, 2 to 4 people. Now, what that practically means is that the CEO is like 90% and the CFO and COO are 50%. And there's, other department heads are 20% or 10% or whatever. But ultimately, you should take that people time and you should have 2 to 4 people worth, so whatever that would be, 80 to 160 hours a week that should be spent, being strategic. So those are the kinds of things like when you're saying, hey, this is what changes. As your company grows, you got to hold people accountable. You need different metrics. You need systems. You need processes. Your job changes from doing into being strategic, and then more and more strategic.
And I've struggled with that, Will. Like I've just been a grinder and a hustler. Like I know how to go out and just get deals done. So like changing my mindset and allowing other people to do deals, like it's a struggle sometimes. I've even questioned at time, like, do I need to go hire a CEO and I'll just be a sales guy? Like, cause that's what I enjoy sometimes, and my leadership team tells me no, that, I think you're doing a great job as a CEO. You just need to do more of that, and again, we've made big investments on the sales side. And my team's doing incredible. I'm very proud of what they're doing. I'm slowly taking myself out of that, which is so cool to watch. It's exciting to look at the team flourish, and they're making a shit ton of money and they're kicking ass. We had a bunch of reps this year, just kick ass, and did exceptionally well. So
that is, if you want to go that journey like you and I've gone, that is where it really gets fun. Is where you see people be able to get promotions in their career and they get to grow to the next level. That's one of the awesome things with the acquisitions is, a lot of people in these companies were capped at their growth because they can't take the founder's job.
Well, the company's not growing either.
Yeah, the company's not growing and they can't take the founder's job. And so they're kind of stuck. And all of a sudden they become a part of our organization. That's like, hey, there's some big opportunities for growth. So, it's great to be able to be a part of that where all of a sudden, you can start to help other people.
You're giving them a future, I think that's super important. Well, look, man, again, man, I truly appreciate you jumping on here with me. This will be on YouTube and every other channel that we have out there, Spotify. So I'll make sure I'll share it with you and you can share it out with everybody. But again, viewers, we appreciate y'all watching in today, and we hope you learned something. Get ready for 2024. We're going to have a kick-ass year. I'm sure Will's going to have a kick-ass year. We're going to continue growing these things and making it happen. So, Will, thank you, man. Happy New Year. Merry Christmas. And I hope you have a great New Year's, man. I'm super pumped. Jimmy and I got a shitload of fireworks we're going to pop. So I'll send you a video. Pretty cool, man.
That'd be awesome. Great to see you, man. Happy New Year.
All right, man. You as well, man. Thank you.